The 1992 Los Angeles Uprising, the Cambodian genocide, Japanese American incarceration. What you know isn't always the full story. Our new podcast, Inheriting, about Asian American and Pacific Islander families where the past is personal.
Korean Americans, we call it 사이구.
Did you ever realize when you were a child that you became an orphan?
Camp was such a hard time. How do you think you got through it?
Listen to Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR network, wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And hey everyone, welcome back to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And we are back for our first episode of 2025, which should have been our last episode of 2024, but lots of stuff happened during the holidays. Like we took a quick break because of my impending parenthood, and then our hometown caught on fire. So it's been quite a few weeks. Rira, how are you doing?
Yeah, I want to rage quit 2025 already. Like it is so, like, I'm just so over it. I know Lunar New Year is happening, and I'm like, I don't even have hope for that year to start off great either. I had to evacuate from the fires. I'm very close to it, so that was a little bit terrifying. My laptop broke, so that was another reason why we couldn't record on time. So it's still broken. I'm recording on my husband's setup right now. So lots of challenges and a lot of personal stuff too. So yeah, I am really glad that we were able to finally sit down and record and talk about this book. And to help talk about this book, we brought a friend. We brought Virginia Duan, who is the entertainment editor of Mochi Magazine and also the creator of the blog Mandarin Mama. Hello, Virginia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here because I feel like discussing this book, which is our December 2024 book club pick, Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, by Nam-Joo. We needed more than just one female voice because, man, what a departure, what a change of, I mean, maybe not tone, but definitely perspective from our November book club pick, Interior Chinatown, which is a very like dudes, Asian dudes, woe is me type of perspective. I feel like this book was about some real shit.
I mean, I won't minimize the struggles that Asian men go through, especially in the entertainment industry. However, it's not a contest, but we do have our own special struggles, and we are going to talk about it in this episode. When I picked this book for book club, because it was my turn to pick, it was pretty intentional because I was like, we read a very dude bro book, so now we're going to read like, sisters, let's get together and like air out our woes, I guess. And I just knew that it wasn't going to be a productive conversation with just Marvin and myself. So I'm really glad to have Virginia here. She is probably like our friend Carmen, like our mutual friend Carmen told me that you are me 10 years from now. And I was like, it's like, you guys are both like very, I don't know, like angry, but I was like, you guys are both writers and you're angry and like expressive. And I was like, okay, we're going to have a great time talking about this book.
Yeah, we needed some of that mature anger in our discussion.
She's also a parent. So like we have two parents on this episode. And I'm, as someone who is, choosing to never have children, we have different perspectives on motherhood and parenthood. So
no, I mean, I fully support this never having children business.
Yo,
I have 5 children too late, but
it's so hard. So yeah, before we get to our discussion, as always, Books and Boba is supported in part by our listeners over at patreon.com/books and boba. So if you've been enjoying our book club and are excited that we're back and want to support us in our endeavors, head on over and become an official member. Our Patreon supporters gain access to our members only Discord server, as well as monthly bonus podcasts, which we will be recording our January episode, hopefully sometime soon, which you'll probably hear a lot more about the December and January experiences of my fatherhood and Rira's escape from fire. So look forward to that. But yeah, let's get started. As always, our book club discussions are all spoilers. So if you have not read the book yet and care about being spoiled, I feel like this book pretty much is what it advertises itself to be. So there's really not a lot of spoilers, except for maybe the last chapter, which is not essentially like a spoiler, but it does like offer a different and also infuriating perspective. But if you do care about that stuff, hit pause now on the podcast, go ahead and read the book. It's a pretty quick read, although pretty, intense. And then come on back and listen to our discussion. And as always, you can always join in by letting us know your thoughts on Discord or on Goodreads. But yeah, let's get started. Rira, why don't you kick us off with the book description?
In a small, tidy apartment on the outskirts of the frenzied metropolis of Seoul lives Kim Jiyoung, a 30-something-year-old millennial every woman. She has recently left her white-collar desk job in order to take care of her newborn daughter full-time, as so many Korean women are expected to do. But she quickly begins to exhibit strange symptoms that alarm her husband, parents, and in-laws. Jiyoung impersonates the voices of other women, alive and even dead, both known and unknown to her. As she plunges deeper into the psychosis, her discomfited husband sends her to a male psychiatrist. Jiyoung's painfully common life is juxtaposed against the backdrop of an advancing Korea as it abandons family planning, birth control policies, and passes new legislation against gender discrimination. But can her doctor flawlessly, completely cure her, or even discover what is truly ailing her? So this book came out in Korea back in 2016, and it was translated into English by Jamie Chang in 2020. And there is a movie with Kwong actually. That came out in 2019.
Oh, now I have to watch it.
I actually heard that it's not as good as the book from Korean watchers. And I think I understand why, because the book really works in third person view in like this clinical study, whereas like with the movie you would have to adapt it in a way where I don't know, it just doesn't suit the medium.
I find it hard to see them being able to dramatize this book because then you have to build sympathy for all the characters. And then I'm pretty sure you don't hire Gong Yoo and not make him a sympathetic character, right? Although he did play a pretty good jackass in Squid Game. So I guess he has that in him.
Yeah, Gong Yoo does not miss. Like his agent is so good. Like Train to Busan, Goblin.
Oh, Goblin.
Squid Games. I'm like, dude, he is so good.
If they did make it a movie, it could be like, what was that movie with Will Ferrell and Emma Thompson where she's a writer and
Stranger Than Fiction, right?
Yeah, it could work something like that.
I can see that, or something with like an omniscient narrator, and I think it that does make sense because I don't think I've ever like actually read the book description because I always kind of knew what this book was about, but hearing it read out loud, it doesn't really map to what this book actually is, right? Because you think, this is a book about like this woman's journey through recovery, but it's not. It's about like, it's essentially a case study, right? When I was reading this book, I was like, this prose is just very clinical, very sparse. And with the footnotes, it just reminded me of like case studies I used to read in grad school, where it's like, here is the story, here are the context, and it asks the readers to, draw their own conclusions, but also like in the face of all this evidence, like it's hard not to like see what the book is what they're trying to tell you. And I think that's really interesting. I feel like with the prose being so sparse, so like clinical, there is no room for like media literacy or lack media literacy to not understand what this book is about.
Right.
Yeah. So just a little bit of background about this book. So Cho Nam-Joo, the author, is actually a former scriptwriter for TV programs. So I'm guessing drama and maybe variety shows. But that's her day job. And she wrote this book within 2 months. And she said that she wanted to pretty much chronicle what Korean women are going through every day, especially during like 2010s when a lot of like gender discrimination, like laws against gender discrimination came up and more women were becoming leaders in the workplace. Of course, there's like a glass ceiling there, but she wanted to have this dialogue with the Korean public. And that like really made sense to me because I was like, this book, like Marvin said, reads kind of like a case study. It is very surgical, clinical, has footnotes, backs up the struggles that Jiyoung and her women family members go through with like actual hard data that people cannot, be like, oh, well, it's all in their head. I'm like, no, this is actually a study that happened. And as someone who is a 90s baby, I was so surprised that I was like in my adolescence when a lot of these laws and diversity movements were happening in Korea. And I was like, what do you mean that the Ministry of Gender Equity wasn't formed until like the early 2000s? Are you kidding me? I was like a full conscious like kid by that point.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes you think about just how recent a lot of equality movements are, right? Like civil rights seems like such a long time ago, but it was really like less than a century ago, right? Like in America. So
yeah, Ruby Bridges is still alive, guys.
I mean, even so, the main character of this book, she is only 4 years younger than me. And so it was, I mean, even in America, 2 years before I was born was the first time women, I think, could buy something without a husband or a male.
Yeah, like they were able to get like a credit card number on their own.
Yeah, it was like 1976, right? Which maybe for some listeners sounds really old, but it was only 2 years before I was born. So yeah, it was. I found it really familiar, even though, like her story, Jiyoung's story felt really familiar, even though she grew up in a completely different country. But simply because that we are similar ages, like it. I was really upset. I had to put the book aside multiple times, because even though the language is actually very simple to read, it's infuriating.
It cuts deep.
Yeah,
for sure.
And technically you could just read it in one afternoon. It's not very long. It's very like easy, accessible language. But I was just so angry and so triggered. Every like 2 pages, I was like, no,
yeah,
I'm not reading this anymore.
It does make me wonder like what the experience was like for Korean national readers, especially Korean national women when this book came out. So it came out in 2016. And like a few months after there was the Gangnam Station murder or the Seocho-dong public restroom murder case. And I explained this in our Discord, but it was a case where this mentally unstable man who had this hatred towards women hid in a bathroom that was near the Gangnam Station. And it was a gender neutral bathroom. So both men and women could use it. He waited until a woman entered the bathroom and stabbed her multiple times, killing her. And when he was arrested and he was put on trial, the authorities deemed him to, be mentally unstable and this to not be a hate crime. And I mean, 2 things can be true. You can be mentally unstable and, perform a hate crime. But of course, like the women of Korea were just like, no, like he hated women, and there is definitely this hatred for women in like the Korean male population. Like it is something that is, you know, really insidious, and people protested by putting post-it notes at the Gangnam station. Usually it was just like, you know, like RIP to the victim, and also like, you know, encouraging other women that, you know, they're not alone in their struggles. And a bunch of right-wing men were just like, well, it's not all men, right? So they went and like, you know, destroyed the post-its and kind of desecrated the memorial that they had there, which was like a totally different conversation in like Korean media. But this happened like this book came out around that time.
Oh.
So like I can only imagine like the anger that a lot of Korean women felt while reading this. And also shortly after, Park Geun-hye, the former president of Korea, the first female president of Korea, she was impeached. And, you know, people were asking, like a lot of reporters were asking Korean women like, oh, like, you know, you support the impeachment, but like, you know, she's like the first woman president. And they're like, she didn't do anything for us. In fact, like gender discrimination is worse under her. So it's not like just because she's a woman and in the most powerful position in the country, it doesn't like automatically fix all of the discrimination and microaggressions that we face.
She was the one with the corruption charges and was also in a cult, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The one with the shaman. But there's a lot of cult stuff in Korea. Another conversation. But
yeah, I feel like the shaman thing does not really narrow it down.
It does not narrow it down at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to read it, like, not to like, you know, I'll say this piece and I'll shut up for a while. But like, as a dude reading this, like, it really does, like, we read a lot of books on this podcast or in this book club that deal with like white privilege and like existing in white spaces as Asian Americans. And, you know, I think this book, because it takes place in an Asian country, but also because it's about gender inequality, like, you know, really brings to fore, like, there's definitely male privilege that a lot of people don't see. And this book, time and time again, Kim Ji-young's male classmates, coworkers, bosses justify their like own privilege through like, just, you know, it's all very familiar, right? I think those of us who grew up under like Chinese, Korean, like a culture that's been touched by like, let's just say Confucian patriarchy values, right? Like a lot of things that happen to Jiyoung feels familiar, right? The fact that her mother-in-law or her grandmother only favored her brother, the fact that like girls at school were expected to follow much stricter dress codes and, you know, ethics guidelines and things like that. Like, it's all very like, unfortunately, it's, you know, even if we don't believe it, we understand it because we've seen it happen in our families and our cultures and our communities, right? So I think that was also part of like, you know, this book definitely like is airing out the dirty laundry of our culture, especially when it comes to patriarchy.
Yeah, for sure. And I really did appreciate the book being separated by like childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, and marriage, because I don't know, it just like builds and builds and builds, and it just builds up to Jiyoung's breakdown. And the book starts with, you know, her having this dissociative disorder. And, you know, like as a reader who's just jumping in without any context to like what happened in her life, it's just like, oh my God, like what traumatic thing happened for her to have this like complete mental breakdown where she is, you know, where she thinks that she's all these other women in her life and talking to herself in like third person and all that. But like after you read the book, you realize, oh, nothing truly terrible happened to her. It's not like she got, you know, I mean, she faced like sexual assault threats, but it's not like she was raped. It's not like she, like later on, like her former coworker talks about the workplace bathrooms having spy cams. And it's like, oh, it's not a book about that. It's not a book about a woman who is being abused by her husband or anything like that. These are very ordinary microaggressions that women face on a daily basis. And it just builds and builds and builds. It's like a death by 1,000 cuts. Mm-hmm. So I think, I think making Jiyoung like a stand-in for everyday women makes sense. And actually, like Jiyoung, the name was the most popular girl name in like the 90s, in like 1980s to 1990s. So that was a very like purposeful choice by the author. But what did you guys think about like her dissociative personality disorder?
Honestly, I didn't really think it was a big deal.
Yeah, I think I thought that was what the book was going to be about. So when the next chapter jumped all the way back to her childhood, it did take me a little bit to like reset and kind of, you know, get into the groove of what the book is actually trying to do. But in terms of like the breakdown, it was just interesting because thematically, right, it works because she is calling out her in-laws through the persona of her own mother. And it's just an interesting kind of, I don't know. I was wondering what it would lead to towards the end. And like the last chapter was definitely not what I expected it to be. But I didn't think it was like, I don't know. I think it happened too early for me to kind of latch onto it, but it definitely did like seem like, okay, this is a woman that has like at this point had enough and is going through something, right? So I guess the book is going to tell us how she got to that point. And like you said, Rira, like it's just a constant oppression from her childhood to her adult years that kind of just builds and builds and builds. And it is amazing that how anyone can like endure all that and still be okay, right?
Like for me, I think part of me thought she was I remember when I was reading it thinking like, oh, maybe she's just using this like as an excuse, not excuse, but as a way to call out her in-laws without it being directly calling out her in-laws. And then, so I thought like, ooh, that would be spicy. Like, but, you know, even her sister-in-law was on her side, you know, and or at least it seemed like it. And I think the book actually reminded me of Forrest Gump because like in the sense of there's one person who experiences all these major life history things. And when I was Forrest Gump came out, I think right after I graduated high school or that summer or maybe after. Anyway, I just remember thinking like, oh my gosh, how can one person go through all these things? Right? Like all these historical events. And it seems like so ludicrous to me. But now that I am that age, I'm like, oh, that's totally, I mean, you just had to be alive. It's not like you were going out of your way to experience all these things. You were just alive and then you experience all these things. And so in that sense, in that same sense, I feel like Jiyoung isn't experiencing anything particularly unique, you know. And I think the real question you kind of ask yourself by the end is, how come more women are not going crazy, or just, you know, figuratively speaking, like how come the real surprise is that so many women bear it? Yeah,
and don't have dissociative personality disorders right. By the end of it. I thought it was really I thought it was a really good narrative choice for the author to make Jiyoung go have her first seizure and breakdown at Chuseok, which is Korean Thanksgiving. And traditionally, you if you're a wife, you go to visit your husband's family. You never go visit your own family. Like president, it's like once you marry, it's like your family does not matter. Like you are fully in the husband's family. And that's something that happened after Confucianism. But like one of the things that she says when she is quote unquote possessed by her mother, and she's like berating her mother-in-law, being like, why don't you let my daughter come home for Chuseok? Like, isn't she a cherished child as well? Like, she deserves to spend time with, you know, the family that she grew up with. And I'm like, yeah, this doesn't seem like a big deal to a lot of people, but I'm like, yeah, like, think about it. Like, think about going to Thanksgiving and Christmas every year and not seeing your family, like the family that you grew up with. That sucks so much. And a lot of the time in Korean culture, the daughter-in-law is like the bottom of the food chain, like quite literally bottom of the food chain, because you eat last. You cook for everyone and you eat last, and it's usually the leftovers. And you know, there's also like the tradition of chesa, which is you know, like you make ancestral food for you make food for your ancestors, and you set up like the funeral table and whatnot. And the daughter-in-law can't even be in the room when they're doing the ancestral rites. So like she helps with all the cooking and food preparation, and she has to like remain outside of the room where they have the table.
Wait, does that include the mom then? Because she's also a daughter-in-law.
It's usually the son who does it, but yeah, like I don't know like the specifics anymore, but like yeah, that was like a very big patriarchal tradition that's kind of been I think watered down over time, because now it's like the birth rate is so low and not every family has like a son to perform the ancestral rites, and nowadays people don't freaking care about doing those traditions. So yeah, like it is a culture that is very used to putting daughter-in-laws and women at the very bottom. So yeah.
In Chinese culture, I learned that some people, like for Chinese New Year, we usually celebrate Nian Ye Fan, which is like the night before the actual New Year day. So you're supposed to spend it with your husband's family, and then the actual day of New Year, you go to the wife's family. But
yeah, we're actually discussing that at this moment, because this is the first time in like almost a decade where my parents are actually in the States for New Year. And so we have to figure out how to balance celebrating with my family, celebrating with my wife's family, who I live with. I live with my wife and my mother-in-law. And the fact that we have two preemie newborns in the house too. It's not to derail, but it's my personal like quagmire right now, figuring out how to figure all that out. But back to the book, I did find it amusing that, you know, truly boomers are the villains of every story, even in Korea, right? Because throughout the book, Jiyoung has a lot of peers that like commiserate with her, like, okay, like this is what we have to deal with. These are ways that you can overcome if you want to. No, she has that one boss who tries her best to make the work environment better for women, but still runs up into their own personal, like they still have their own patriarchal demons to deal with outside of work that affects them, right? But then time and time again, with the exception of maybe Jiyoung's mother, who is kind of half and half, the boomer age, and I don't know if generations map to Korean generations, but the boomer age women in her life are like the biggest like source of patriarchy. Like her mother-in-law, her grandmother.
Oh yeah, definitely Jiyoung's grandmother for sure.
Yeah, all of her relatives who are like judging her for not being able to have a child, and when she does have a daughter, judging her for like not having a son, right? Like all those things that are very familiar, because unfortunately the cultures we grew up in, where we're exposed to that stuff, even if we don't believe it. And but it's like it's often the people of the older generation kind of setting the rules and making the excuses.
Yeah, generational trauma gets passed on and we have to work through it. And I would like to say that, each generation does, cope with it a little bit better and try to make it a little bit better for the generation after them. But obviously we have our own baggage and you can't dismantle something that's been existing for generations overnight. There's actually a quote in the book that really struck me and I wrote it down. The world had changed a great deal, but the little rules, contracts, and customs had not, which meant the world hadn't actually changed at all. And this quote is specifically talking about like the socioeconomics in Korea, where now women are able to, work full time, have their own careers, but at the same time, they're facing discrimination in their job interviews. They're not getting promoted. And it's like, oh yeah, they're able to get jobs, which is, a vast improvement from grandmother's generation. Like they're able to go to college and all this stuff. But in the end, you have the same mindset of like, well, a woman's purpose in life is to be a mother. So how can you focus on your career when you're going to be focusing on your child without even considering maybe the woman does not want to be a mother, and that's totally okay.
Yeah, it's funny, Marvin, that you mentioned that the villains are the boomers, because I really didn't think there was an actual villain. But now that you mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, maybe, yeah. But it was, the reason why I didn't really think there was a villain is it's more like the system is the villain, right? Yeah. The system, which is enforced by people. Because that's the way it always was. And it's not like Jiyoung's husband is bad or terrible. He seems like a nice guy, just doesn't quite know how to tell his mom. You know what I mean? Or like,
I have a feeling he's the Gong-yu character in the movie. Right?
Oh yeah, sure. He is. I checked. He is. He plays Taeyeon in the movie.
And the coworkers all seem nice. The same cohort that she got, but until she found out that they, got paid more from the get. Or that they even knew about the cameras and didn't say anything. So I think part of the reason why I found it interesting that, at least to me, that there wasn't so obvious a villain is that the horribleness is perpetuated by totally nice people.
Yeah.
Because that's how systems work, right? It's enforced by perfectly reasonable people we love, we marry,
Yeah.
I mean, Jiyoung's grandmother. Sorry, Marvin, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, like, Jiyoung's grandmother, even though she perpetuates a lot of the patriarchal ideals, like, I feel bad for her because she had 4 sons and they all turned out to be like useless. They don't take care of her. It's her daughter-in-law who, is taking care of her, housing her, and she still tells her daughter-in-law, oh, you need to have at least 2 sons. Mm-hmm. You need at least 2 sons to take care of you. And it's like, do you not see who's taking care of you right now? And, Jiyoung's grandmother being like, well, I married a husband who, is totally incompetent, but at least he doesn't hit me. And that's like better than the fate of a lot of women my age. And I'm like, I feel so bad because the system is like horrible to her.
Yeah, I think what I was getting at is the fact that, like, for better or for worse, for the most part, boomer age people are still essentially the people who hold power in all of our societies, right? Because people are living longer, they refuse to retire, they still hold the power to control the younger generations through government, through policies, through, culture. And they're more often not just so conservative that they just pass on those at this point archaic views. And Rima, you mentioned the fact that, like, even though policies change, cultures doesn't change. The culture still remains stagnant. I think there's definitely like a big source of friction is the fact that policy and culture are not intertwined. Like, they pass policy, but they don't have the process to also change culture. And I think there's an example in, I think, the third or fourth, I think it was the 4th chapter, where in the footnotes he talks about how, like, a policy was changed so that children can now take the surname of the mother. But even though that is now an option, it never happens because of the cultural stigma of why would you let your child not take the father's name? How could you do that? And it reminds me of an incident that I think I've told you about this, Rira, where we were at a friend's engagement party and a friend of a friend was there and we were chatting. We didn't know this guy, but it came up that like my wife did not take my last name when we got married for various reasons. But the fact is like she kept her last name. And this friend's husband turned to me. He was like a Korean dude. I think he was Korean. And like he turned to me and said very seriously, very straight faced, like, how could you let her do that?
Oh, dude. Okay, we have to talk about the so-called good guys in this book. But like, yeah, like
and I'm like,
I had the
excuse me,
same
like
I had the same experience too because I didn't change my name.
I didn't change my name
when I got married, and I think I'm like the first woman in my husband's side of the family to keep my surname and not adopt my husband's surname. So I know, like, my in-laws did not give me a hard time about it, but they did ask, saying like, "Oh, do you plan to change your surname?" And I said, "No, Korean tradition, women keep their surname. So why would I change it?" Also, I worked for my degree. I'm not changing the name. Like,
right?
Yeah, I was explaining to them like, well, you know, that's kind of like a Western thing because in Asia, like I don't think people change their surnames when they get married. They become like, you know, like Mrs. Yu or Madam Yu, but they're still their name to like legally, right?
Yeah.
But so it's also kind of interesting how already patriarchal culture subsumes other patriarchal, you know, traditions to like expand their power, right?
You should have said, stop being such a colonized dick.
yeah.
It was a friend of a friend's. We didn't want to
right. No, I get that.
My wife's face was very like, are you fucking kidding me?
Seriously.
I know, like, there are a lot of times where even with like guy friends or people that I thought were, you know, pretty progressive for their gender, it's just like, where in the audacity did you get this patriarchal mindset from? Like, they'll say something where I'm like, do you not hear yourself? And like, I know that a lot of non-Asian readers, like, I'm sure like there's this feeling of, oh, at least it's better here. At least, you know, our patriarchal society is not as oppressive as Korea. But like, oppression comes in different flavors. Like Virginia and I were talking about this earlier. And, you know, like, think about that French woman who like suffered that horrible fate of her husband drugging her and having his friends,
strangers
rape her, and like her not knowing about it until like 3 decades later. Or in Germany recently, they found a Telegram group chat of like 7,000 German men who were exchanging like you know, photos of their female relatives and you know, like very inappropriate pictures of women being assaulted. And it's like, yeah, that's not Asian. Those are like, that's misogyny.
Yeah, wasn't there like, they found out there was like a 70,000 member strong chat group of dudes talking about like sexually assaulting their like family members?
Yeah, and like, I've heard from the youngsters on TikTok that there are a lot of college fraternities that have like group chats just like that. Or, you know, they have Snapchats where they're like rating women that would be an easy lay. And as an easy lay, meaning like easy to drug and rape them and have them wake up and not know what happened. It's terrible. So, yeah, like, misogyny comes in all different flavors. And yeah, you do not have it better than than certain countries. Like, I feel like we're all facing the same enemy, and a lot of people don't recognize that, which is very frustrating.
Well, that's where the American exceptionalism and white privilege and
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I'm like, how do I say this without being
Pissing
really
off
mad?
a bunch of people.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
it
I don't want to
sounds
ruin
like
your podcast.
I mean, yeah, it sounds like even in Korea, the mere fact of reading this book puts you on their shit list, right? Like,
Oh, yeah. Like, freaking. Okay, so this book got really popular after. Like, actually, like, it got popular because the new president at the time, President Moon Jae-in, like, he read it. But, like, I remember Irene from Red Velvet, a K-pop girl group, like, she recommended this book, and, like, fans are like, you're a feminist. And feminist is a very, like, polarizing word in Korea. It does not mean the same thing as it does here. It's exclusively used for men haters in Korea. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. But they're like burning Irene's like photo cards, burning her album, slandering her on the internet. And there's RM of BTS who recommends this book, and people are praising him for being so progressive and for caring about women issues. And I'm like, did you not see how an actual woman who recommended this book was treated? Like, what is the difference? What is this?
The bar for men is so low.
So low.
I feel like in this case, it probably is okay to hate men. After reading this
No,
book.
this book really made me hate men, like a lot. And not men in general, as in like patriarchy men, not men in specific, right? Even though I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced this kind of behavior from people in specific, right? But it also makes me think, like, so the only reason why I don't turn into a full-blown Korean definition, I guess, of feminist is because I have 3 boys. I don't hate my boys, you know? I don't hate my children, and I don't hate my husband. Sometimes I do, but that's just the normal breadth of human emotion. You know, I don't hate my brother, you know, like, but I think that's also the problem, right? Because a lot of times complicity is in the silence, right? It's in the participation, and one of my oldest, he's in 9th grade, and he always talks about how, like, yes, kids use like the F word as a slur against gay people, but they say it, like, jokingly, and I'm like, hey, that's not cool. He's like, yeah, I know. I was like, do you say anything about it? He's like, no, I'm not stupid. But like, part of me is like so sad about it. I was like, I don't expect you to say something about it because I understand, like, that's social suicide. And also, I really wish you would say something about it.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, like, a lot of it is like conditioning by society. And we see that with Jiyoung's like brother, who is kind of like seen as the golden child. He's like finally the son that, you know, her mom had been waiting for. But it's just like, look at your 2 daughters. Look at Eun-young and Jiyoung. They're the ones who are taking care of the house. They're sharing everything while like their brother is getting first dibs on food, all the new stuff. And yeah, it's like that. Like, he wasn't born as, you know, he wasn't born as exceptional, you know, like they made that happen. They could have easily made him do chores and have like share his room instead of like, I think that like made me so angry, like the way they would baby the brother. Because I've seen so many Korean men who have been like, who are like mama boys and they don't know how to do anything because like their moms have just like seen them as like little emperors, like as the best thing that they've done in their lives. And a lot of these men just marry because they want like a second mom to take care of them. And it's just like, I've seen so many men like that. So to see Jiyoung's brother kind of be Because I'm like, you're not grown up yet. You're not like dating anyone yet. But I know that you will turn out to be one of those men if there is no course correction right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about how like a lot of the guys that we meet in throughout Jiyoung's life, they're not quote unquote bad guys, but they do traffic in that male privilege of like minimizing all of her struggles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to say, well, we have it bad too, or it's not all that bad. At least you have this. At least, like justifying their own privilege, by sometimes not even addressing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's two characters that really illustrate this. One is her husband, Taeyang, but who on paper seems like just like a guy who's trying to be better,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time allows her to quit her job, kind of convinces her to, you know, focus on family, like kind of still encourages the patriarchy line in what her role should be, even though he's saying all the right things, right? And he, you know, doesn't have the courage to stand up to his family when they like talk crap about her, you know. So like while I was rooting for him to like, you know, man up, it was also like he just didn't like he was there halfway, but he wasn't there all the way, right? And that was frustrating. And then, you know, we have the final chapter, which changes perspective, right? It goes from, this is when they kind of reveal, I guess this is the spoiler, right? Where the entire book was a case study. This is the case, these are the case files of this psychiatrist who has taken on Jiyoung's case. And he talks all about how he's learning about this stuff and how reflecting his own life and how he's treating his own wife. And then at the very end, like, because his assistant, that he really likes, is, you know, quitting because she's having a kid, resolves to not hire a woman next time, right?
Yeah,
or not
he's
hire...
like, oh, I'm not going to hire a woman because they're going to eventually leave once they have kids. So there's no point in investing in their career, even if they have the skills.
And it's like, you learn nothing, my guy. Like you've learned jack squat.
Right. And it reminds me of a quote from the book. I think she says like, do laws and institutions change values, or do values drive laws and institutions? And Rira, I can't remember if that's the one that you quoted.
No, it's not, but it's very, very similar.
Yeah. I was like, oh shoot. But it's totally that, right? Like, I feel like that encapsulates a lot of the struggle or whatever. But like, it's so difficult too, because I am a stay-at-home mom, and we made that decision because my husband made so much more money than I did, and then the amount that we would have to pay to care for our children, to have someone else care, you know, it's the same reasons why Jiyoung chooses to stay home with her daughter, right? And every kid just traps you longer. So, you know, Marvin, you're smart, getting two out of the way. Good job. At the same time.
No, it's two at the same. It's so hard. I'm so tired.
I know. Everyone
I'm barely
I know
holding together for this conversation right now.
Everyone I know who has twins says the first like 3 years are just really shitty, but after that, it's so much better. So, but yeah, it's sort of like, well, you know, you're just trapped in this cycle. And my husband's pretty progressive. Well, I wouldn't call him progressive, but he's not like, you know, he's like he's very supportive. Everyone always jokes that, oh, I wear the pants in the family, and like, and he's just a decent person, right? But even then, like, I'm still trapped, if that makes sense, right? Like, you know, if I ever wanted to get a divorce, I really couldn't. Or if I did, I would have to move in with my mother, because we would be impoverished, right? like, where would the children go? You know, like, and it's just, and then you see why women don't want children. You know, like, I love my children, and I'm not saying that I haven't grown or become a better person with having them, but I don't think that's the only way you can grow in these areas, right? Like, and I totally understand, like, why women are refusing to to sleep with men and to have kids, because it really does trap you, because the expectation is that the mom will take care of everything. And if the mom is taking care of everything, then they cannot focus on their the job or the thing that, like, well, I guess the work culture in Korea is also
Oh, it's worse. It's so much worse in Korea in terms of like work culture. But
she liked her job, right?
She did.
She really loved doing it.
Yeah. And, you know, she took pride in it. And it was just like really heartbreaking for me to read like her being like, oh, I don't want to be a mom yet. I just found a thing that I, you know, love to do, even though I don't get paid for it. And her husband is like, well, like, I do want to have kids. And it reminded me of a conversation that I had with like a friend of a friend recently, how like, it's like how for like women, when you think about having children, you have to think about, you know, your body changing, the physical trauma of it, and also, you know, your career, like maternity leave. Are they going to pay you for that? And then afterwards, you're like, you know, breastfeeding. Like there's just like a lot of things that you have to consider right from the beginning because your body is, you know, going to be growing this human. Whereas with a lot of men who say, oh, I want to be a parent, I want to be a dad, they're not going through those physical changes. Like they can leave whenever they want, like technically. Like women do not have that choice.
Yeah, it's so easy for us. Sorry.
And when Jiyoung, like, there's a scene where Jiyoung snaps at her husband because her husband is like, I'll help with the dishes, I'll help with the diapers. And she's like, why are you offering quote unquote help as if it's charity work? Because you're assuming that this is my job. This is like all I'm good for. But it's like I was someone who was really good at my job, and it's not fair that, you know, you get to keep doing your job and consider parenting as like this extra credit thing rather than a full-time job in itself. Yeah. And the trigger for when she gets her dissociative personality disorder is when she goes to the park with her daughter, and she's like, oh my God, like I'm going to get like just a cheap, small cup of coffee because I need a break from all of this. And nearby, there are office workers who are around her age, and they see her and they're like, wow, she's a mum roach. And it was like translated in a weird way. I don't know the actual Korean word for it, but the sentiment is clear. It's like, oh, you're a mom who is slacking off and you're drinking coffee on your husband's hard-earned money. Like, you get to live this pampered life and not worry about money. And it's like, it must be so easy for you. And it's like, and that's when she snaps, because she's just like, I'm not a mom roach. I work so hard to have like she's like, I'm a mom. Yeah, but it doesn't make me a slacker. Like, I'm working very hard to keep our family united.
Yeah. And it's juxtaposed with that other scene where she is still going to work while pregnant and like is trying to get a seat in the subway. And there's a younger woman who like gives her crap for being pregnant, still going to work.
I mean, it's not like giving her crap because she's going to work. She's giving her crap because it's like, oh, you're poor. And yeah, because like the thing that she says to her is like, oh, like like ready to pop and still taking the subway, peasant. And it's like, yeah, like, I mean, classism in Korea is pretty bad too, if you've seen Squid Games and Parasite. But yeah, it's like this idea of like, oh, if you're pregnant, like you shouldn't be out in public because there's like no space for you, pretty much. You're kind of considered a nuisance. And I don't know what it is about this generation, but like I remember like back in my day, you were trained to, you know, get out of your seat for a pregnant woman, get out of a seat for someone who, you know, is older or has like crutches or whatever. But I don't really see that happening anymore. And
I mean,
I don't know
what happened. It's our old friend, late stage capitalism and individualism.
Yeah, that's true. Individualism. Yeah.
No, when I was in Seoul, and also whenever I'm in Taipei, and that's the only time I really take public transportation with my children. It's always women or the elderly who give me their seats.
Yeah. And we see how like women like in their way try to make other women's lives better. It's always the other women who are, you know, backing each other up.
Mm-hmm.
And the bar is so low for men in this book. Just
it's
so
not just the
low.
book, right? It's life, you know. I took my children to the park every day for like 10 years. And then during the pandemic, my husband would start taking them because he was home. And everyone's like, oh, he's such a great dad. And he is a great dad. But then we had one of our biggest fights ever. And he said, well, all you are is just a glorified Uber driver. And I was like,
girl, I hope you like.
Oh, I almost divorced him on the spot. I was so angry. I almost threw something at him. And I was like, listen, that's my, like, you can't get praise taking the children to the park if I get shit on for driving them places. Like, that's our job. It's your job to take your fucking kid to the park. And he's like, I'm sorry, that came out wrong. I was like, well, do better, because that's a shitty thing to say. You know, like, and I don't want to hate on my husband. He's a good guy.
But we see that like even the good guys, they have a lot of unlearning to do.
Yeah.
Because like the pipeline to like red pill guy is very direct. And I had this conversation with my husband as well. Like he was saying like, you have to actively fight against the system to make sure you turn out to be a half decent man, because it is so like the things that they shove down your throat is just so toxic and so just in your face that like it's really hard for, you know, boys to, you know, get out and not be total misogynistic monsters.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so my situation, I'm probably going to be ending up being primary caretaker. I'm stay-at-home dad. I podcast for a living, so it's barely a job. And my wife has like a really good job with really good benefits and just great insurance. So like that's kind of how our situation is probably going to move forward, because I have more flexibility with what I do. And, you know, to her credit, she allows me to do this. But already like kind of we're experiencing just like, yeah, microaggressions based on like how we choose to like form our family unit, right? Like how could I let her, like, again, like it's the same conversation, like how could I let her do this, right? How could I allow this to happen? And it's like, well, she makes more money, like
right.
I like nice things too, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And like we didn't really talk about her that much, but Jiyoung's mom, like Virginia and I were talking about her like before we started recording, and we're just like, oh, Jiyoung's mom is badass. And she really like carried the family on her back. Like she's the one who made sure that they invested money in real estate and had like, you know, made like very good business decisions so that her children can all have the money to go to college, because that was something that was not given to her, because she, as a girl growing up, like they're just like, it doesn't matter how smart you are, we're going to pour all of our resources into your brother because he has a better chance of making its way into the world rather than a woman who's going to end up having children and all that stuff. And I really loved how, you know, she tried to make things better for her daughters, but like even then, like she still had patriarchy ingrained in her, and she's like, you know, still giving her son like the first dibs in food, and, you know, letting him like take food from his sisters. And when the older sister Eunyoung is just like, hey, why are you letting him get away with so much stuff? Why is he not doing chores? Like when we were his age, we were like running the house. Like that's not fair. And she's like, you know what? That is not fair. Like, I'm going to fix that. And I'm like, yeah, that's a mindset that all of us should have, because we all make mistakes. We all are like born into like circumstances, and that like creates our identity. But it's like, yeah, we can unlearn that. We can make it better for our children. So I thought like Mi-suk was a really great character, and I laughed so hard when her husband gets back from drinking with his
Yes,
mates,
this was a good scene.
and he's like, oh my God, like all of my friends are working like piss poor government jobs that gives them nothing because of the recession, because there was like a big recession in Korea during like the early 2000s, and he's like, and they're, you know, they try to set up businesses for like trendy food, but it all collapsed, and we're living such a better life all because of me. And then his wife is like, I did all the work. And he's like, okay, you're like, what, 70% of like the reason why we ended up okay. And I'm like, 70%? Really, guy? Like, I'm pretty sure that's like closer to 95% of her being able to, like, it's just like, really?
All he really offered was the ability to purchase and like have property, right? Like his name is all he has. It's like his gender is all he has to offer.
Yeah. Yes. He was her beard, right? Like.
Okay, so a thing that I have seen in reviews have been like people said they were disappointed by Jiyoung, quote unquote, giving up, and how like the ending wasn't really like hopeful, and they're just like, oh, she's not cured, and like, and I was like, did you not? We did not read the same books, because.
Yeah. I take back my earlier assertion that this book is media literacy proof, because obviously people missed the point.
Yeah, she can't be cured because it's a societal problem, right? And it's not just it's a complex problem, the root of which is what, patriarchy and hypercapitalism, right? And so that it doesn't matter how progressive her husband could be, or you know, her family could be, like that might ameliorate some of the damage, right? But on a societal level, if she wanted to get a job, she couldn't, right? It's economically unfeasible for her to get a job.
Yeah, there's like this whole scene where she's looking for a part-time job, and she like almost gets one at a grocery store, scooping out ice cream. Mm-hmm. And she's like, well, like I have to ask my husband before I make a final decision. And the lady who was working at the ice cream bar is like, hey, I graduated from college too. I have a college degree. Like, you know, I'm not here because I'm lazy and I couldn't make my way. It's just, I'm the same as you, had a kid and had to make money somehow. And it's just like, yeah, like for women who get pregnant and have to spend like the first 2 years taking care of their kid, that's a big gap in their work history. And it's much harder to get back into the industry when you have that break.
Mm-hmm. And then what if she gets pregnant again?
Yeah.
So like, I have 5 kids, and I was very, very, very upset when I found out I was pregnant with my last kid. Like to the point where I was seriously considering aborting. Because I knew my life would be just fucked for 3 years. I mean, not because we don't love this baby or whatever, but
it's hard. It's
a
like
lot of
being
work.
A parent is a lot of work.
And you know, sometimes I do, like even like 3 weeks, I'm like, man, what would it be like if we were just super rich and could just hire someone to like take care of the kid at night, right? Because that's what people do. They have like night nannies or something that come like, oh, I need to sleep. And it's like, but maybe it's society, or maybe it's like, oh, we don't really want to do that. These are like, you know, my wife and I are both 40 years old. These are probably our only kids that we're going to have. And like, no, we want to, even though it's, you know, draining us physically and mentally, like we want to experience that. Again, is that also like just like societal brain rot? Like, is that like what society wants us to believe?
I mean, there's multiple ways to parent, right?
Yeah.
And it's what gets you, at the end of the day, you just want to survive. And sleep is very important for survival.
Yeah. And like, I know that there's, for some families, they have like the grandparents taking care of the baby while like the parents, you know, work to provide for the family. And there's always that worry of, oh, the boomer parent, the silent generation parent raising my Gen Z, Gen Alpha baby. And it's just like, are they going to learn the wrong things from the grandparent?
But you know what, though? Grandparents raising children, they raise them so differently than how they raised you.
It's different. It's like their second chance, their redemption.
And sometimes I get really angry when I see my mother with my kids because I'm like, where was this? And she wasn't even like a terrible parent. You know what I mean? And then another part of me is just like super grateful. Right? Like that. Yeah. That she gets this chance, that my kids get to experience a different part of my mother, you know, and that I get to see it. And I think that was part of the problem for Jiyoung, right? Like, because their families were not close by, and that their families couldn't help even if they wanted to, or even though her parents were closer, it was still they still had to like provide for themselves, right?
They had their porridge restaurant to take care of, and yeah.
And so it isn't just patriarchy, right? It is like just hyper-capitalism.
Yeah, like this isolation, right? This, like, I guess Korea has inherited the societal norm of nuclear families is the way to go. F villages, you just need a mom and a dad and the kids, and that's all you need to like survive.
Even with the village, though, it's usually the woman who's taken care of.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's that. With Misuk's, Jiyoung's mother's like flashbacks and whatever, like they talk about how she and her sister would, you know, take care of the family so that the son would have like all these opportunities. And it made me think about my family, because my family is like pretty progressive for like Koreans. I did not think this growing up. I thought I grew up in a very traditional household until I found out how other Korean families and Korean diasporan families function. And I'm like, oh, no, like, because like all the women in my family, they went to college. Like there was no question of like, oh, we're going to prefer that our boy gets all of the resources. Like pretty much everyone got resources, but at the same time, like the sons got a little more slack. You know, they can go out late. They can, like, they don't have to do as many chores. Like, it's up to the girls to do it. And, you know, like, I think about how I grew up, and it's like, oh, yeah, like, I grew up as pretty much the quote unquote golden child. And even then, a lot of patriarchal stuff is still like ingrained in me. And I think about like, I had a conversation with my mom since, you know, I had to evacuate from the fire and I had to like go down to Orange County. So that like, you know, I was safe. And we were talking about inheritance because, you know, my parents are getting older and they think about stuff like this. And they were saying, oh, even though you're the girl, you're going to get everything from like, you know, not just us, but from like your grandmother and all that stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's very nice. But did you have to add the, even though you're a girl? Like, so even then it's like, I've come from a very progressive family, but it's like, you know, there's that condition of like, oh, even though you're a girl, you get this benefit. Be grateful. It's like,
oh, I didn't hear it as that.
Oh, really?
I heard it as, hey, society would expect us not to give this to you, and we are not doing that.
For me, it's like, to me, it sounds like, oh, like, aren't we so gracious because we're not like other traditional parents? We are giving this to you. Like,
yeah, that makes sense.
Be grateful.
Yeah, I feel like what's happening here is the same with like how, you know, we're saying the bar for men are so low. Maybe the bar for parents are also low. Like
true,
those of us outside. You know?
I mean, like I grew up with like my mom telling me like there are opportunities that didn't exist for me when I was your age, but you still have to work harder than boys to to get the same shot. And I'm like, yeah, I felt that, when I was reading Jiyoung's like childhood, like how with the uniform restrictions and how like there was like class punishments and the girls got punished for the boys' behavior. And it's like, why is it up to the girls to rein the behaviors of the men around them, the boys around them? And I also like definitely related to like the bullying as well. Oh, because like, she's like, oh man, like this boy is like making my life freaking miserable. And the only thing that the teacher is saying is, oh, he likes you. That's why he's like, harassing you. And I'm like, no, that like we are not giving that pass to boys these days. Like, absolutely freaking not. Like, we treat people with decency. Don't freaking throw things at them and like steal their property. Like,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, we're back at men suck. Yeah, we're
not okay.
Around.
Like it's definitely not all men, but it's enough men and too many men.
And it's always a man.
And it's always a man. You can always count on a girl to have your back unless like they're a pick-me girl, but the chances of that happening is still like pretty rare. Like I was thinking about like how Jiyoung was like, when she was in high school, she was on that bus, right? And like one of her classmates is harassing her, being like, it's like, oh, like, it's like, you're not going to talk to me, even though you've been flirting with me, like in the hallways and in class. And she's like, I don't know who you are. Like, if I've ever smiled at you, it's to just, avoid awkwardness. Like, why are you why are you projecting all of these things onto me? And he follows her off of the bus. And she texts her dad being like, hey, like, can you please meet me at like the bus station? Like I'm really scared. And her dad is late, so he's not there while this boy is like stalking her. And the person who rescues her is like this lady who pretends to, say like, hey, like little student, like you forgot your scarf. And she's the one who's like blocking him from further harassment. And I'm like, yeah, how many times have women stepped up to the plate to protect other women? Because I've definitely done that for other women, and other women have done that for me.
Yeah, and so and this goes back to like the men being complicit part, which is it's not enough to not be the guy. Like, it's not enough to not be the creep. Like,
speak up. Like, if your bruh is gonna be doing something questionable, then you need to speak up on it and actually stop them from doing questionable things.
Yeah. All right. I think we're coming up on the end of our discussion. So before we wrap up our discussion of Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, you guys have any last thoughts to share about reading this book and about reading this book?
I know a lot of people who have read this book. Like, it's either been like, oh, this is so relatable, or they were expecting this book to be revolutionary because they've heard so many good things about it, and it's won awards and sold millions of copies. But this book kind of shows how mundane abuse can be. And I don't think this book is meant to be revolutionary. It is very, like, we keep saying the word clinical, but it's like, hey, like, it is what it is. You're either going to come out of reading this book with a wider perspective, or you're just going to go through your life just ignoring it because it's not your experience. Oh, I guess, like, we do ask this question of who is this book for? And this book was intentionally for, like, just Korean nationals, not even just strictly Korean national women, but like Korean nationals being like, hey, like, Korean women, like, you're not crazy. Like, this is stuff that happens to you every day, and it does add up. And then to Korean men who are the supposed good guys is like, hey, you're not good enough. You need to step up. And then to like the politicians and like people who run the economy, it's like, hey, do better, because these laws are not helping, because there's still like cultural discrimination. So yeah, this book was for Koreans, but of course there's some overlap in our cultures, in misogyny, in Western culture as well. So yeah, I enjoyed reading this book. It's not the most poetic or like lush novel out there. It's very much like reading an essay. So I think going in with an open mindset is very, very important for this book.
I wouldn't say I enjoyed it. I feel like it's an important book, and I can see why. I can see why it became kind of like a rallying cry-ish. And I can see why incels were all in their feelings about it.
They're still in their feelings about it.
Like who's emotionally incompetent now? Yeah, I would say that it's one of those books that you have to give yourself space to read. And it doesn't on the outset seem traumatizing, but it really is very traumatizing as you read it. Possibly because I'm the same age as this person and experienced a lot of those same things. So it's very, be gentle to yourself as you read it.
Be gentle to yourself for real. I mean, like, I'm younger than Virginia. I'm younger than Jiyoung in this book, and I definitely grew up during the hopeful 2000s of Korea being like, girls can do it too, girls can be leaders too, but at the same time maybe you shouldn't lead because boys are naturally better leaders, and it's like that's not so great either.
Yeah, I think Virginia, you mentioned that it was hard to just finish the book. And, I read this book in pieces because, I was going back and forth in the hospital. So I was like, okay, I have all this time. I can finish this book. It's pretty short. And I found myself kind of dreading going back to the book, just knowing that it's just going to be more like bad times. Right? It's going to be more bummers. This book is, it's a bummer to read, even as a dude, because, I won't speak for all men, but it's not hard to empathize with doing all the right things and still not being enough, and how that is way more elevated, way more exponentially harder for girls, in Korea and even in America, in society in general, right? And the fact that that it's just only going to get worse. It's only going to pile on as she gets older. And as societal expectations become more heavier, making money, getting a job, being a mother, being a wife, and all that entails. And so, it's not by any means a hard read, but I definitely think it's a necessary read. Again, it's interesting that we read this book as a follow-up to Interior Chinatown, which is also a book that deals with a lot of here are the grievances of Asian American men in media. And, as people who have been in and around Asian American entertainment, Asian American literature, none of the themes are, again, revolutionary. These are all things that we understand. So obviously the book isn't teaching us anything, but having all the grievances in one place really does elevate it to this is a problem, right? But Kim Ji-young is definitely, to me personally, a more important read, right? Because having this all laid out in one place really, if you haven't thought about it before, it really makes you think about how it is a little too much. It is a lot. And Kim Ji-young she's not unique in her struggle to overcome all of these expectations. This is every woman pretty much has to struggle. Add onto that other considerations, cultural considerations, if you're an immigrant, if you're, in another country, it's hard to read this book and not come out wanting to be and do better. and also understanding that that may not be the conclusion other men who read this book come to, right? Really
yeah,
is.
they could
I think,
they could easily be like, well, I have troubles too. I have struggles too. I mean, look at Interior Chinatown. Like the stuff that the character goes through there is, it's not a cakewalk. And I'm like, yeah. But at the same time, I feel like your grievances have been publicly discussed so much. Whereas like Jiyoung and women's struggles with like systemic racism and gender discrimination, like it kind of gets brushed aside a lot. So I don't know. Like even though like I said in Interior Chinatown, I'm like, oh, this book doesn't tell me anything new. Like I already know all of this. I already know all the stereotypes. I know how bad Hollywood could be to actors who are marginalized. It's not new. But at the same time, like, this book isn't new. Like, I know how sucky Korean patriarchal society is. But at the same time, I don't know, I felt like it was more, I don't want to say important, but that's kind of how it felt for me. I was like, okay, this is a book that society needs. And I didn't really feel that from Interior Chinatown, because that's not the purpose of the novel. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad we read it, but I did not have a good time reading it.
It's what, 169 pages?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But it's just like, even then, like, just so oppressive, right? Like, just like 165 pages of oppression.
Yes.
And that does wear on you. So, like, those of you who have listened to our podcast discussion and have read this book, kudos to you for making it through it, because it did require some amount of willpower, I will say.
Yeah, sometimes the length of the book, sometimes a really long book can be a breeze.
Yeah.
But sometimes the shorter ones,
especially
really
a book
traumatize you.
Yeah, especially a book that, like, it does not end with a hopeful message. This book ends with like, yeah, shit sucks. And it doesn't change. Like the last chapter with the psychiatrist, it's like, yeah, like even the most even someone who understands the struggle and can like reflect on it is still complicit. And
he should treat his wife better too. Like what like that was another thing in the book where I was just like him being like, my wife is such a smart person. She like did her clinicals and she has like all these degrees, but now she just stays at home and does like math problems for like out of like an elementary school math textbook.
Oh, it makes me so sad.
And I'm just like, do you not understand why she's doing that? Like,
oh, all right.
Yeah, if there's a villain, it's the psychiatrist.
Yeah, it's the psychiatrist. I take it back. There is a villain in the story, and it is the psychiatrist.
Yeah, and by extension, all the dudes who read this book and say, not all men, right? Because that's essentially what he did. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, with that'll do it for a discussion of Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, by Nam-Joo. If you have anything to add to our discussion of the book or of the book itself, please let us know either on Discord or on our Goodreads forums. We always love to hear your feedback on our discussion whenever possible. Virginia, thank you so much for joining us
to
discuss
for having
this
me.
book.
And where can people find you? And you're also an author, so plug in your books.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at the Mandarin Mama. I think I have the same handle on Blue Sky as well. And yeah, I'm an author. I have 2 books out. It's called Elusive and Weightless. And I guess if you like stories about incredibly messy people recovering from trauma, they are not light reads. And they're spicy, and it's all set in the K-pop backdrop, then they might be the book for you.
All right. So for the people who want to join us next month, not next month, it's already halfway through January. What is time?
Yeah, we're a little late, so apologies for getting this out there. But we did announce it on Instagram and social media, which, we'll have to revisit whether we want to stay on any meta platforms going forward. But
it's true. Yeah. Jesus.
Rira, what are we reading for the month of January, which is our patrons pick for this month?
Yeah, so we are reading Sister Snake by Amanda Lee Coe. And it is about two sisters, Sue and Emerald, who were actually snakes in a former life, basking under the moon in Tang Dynasty China. And 1,000 years later, they are experiencing like contemporary struggles, I guess. I'm just looking at the book summary and I'm like, oh, they go through a lot.
Yeah, this is a reimagining of the Chinese folktale Legend of the White Snake, which is, I think there's a couple Netflix movies based on this folktale as well, but it's a very classic story, kind of with a modern twist on it. This was a suggestion by our patrons, and so I'm looking forward to discussing this with you all at the end of this month, which will be hopefully in a few weeks. Feel free to read along, let us know your thoughts, again, on our Discord server or on Goodreads. We love to include your feedback on our podcast whenever possible. But yeah, with that'll do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Glad to be back.
We don't know how long we're back for, but we're back.
This will be either the last episode of the Biden administration or the first episode of that other guy's administration. But we're happy to have you with us. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Everyone.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Candace. We are so excited to have you join me and Kathy for a brand new season of the Korean Drama Podcast, the podcast about watching Korean dramas by people who don't watch Korean dramas.
I'm so excited to join the podcast, but where's Kathy? She said she'd meet us here.
Candace, I'm right here.
Why is Kathy's voice coming from this chicken meatball?
So, funny story. I was so busy watching Korean dramas on my phone to prepare for this podcast that I accidentally walked into a mysterious machine and got turned into food. And, excuse me, Kim, I'm obviously a chicken nugget.
Agree to disagree.
Well, that's a weird coincidence because for our 5th season of the Korean Drama Podcast, we're watching the comedy sci-fi series Chicken Nugget.
Join us each week as we discuss the highs and lows of Chicken Nugget episode by episode.
So grab a snack, maybe not chicken nuggets, and follow us on your favorite podcast app, part of the Potluck Podcast Collective.
You're totally going to eat me, aren't you?